Thomas Reiss, welcome back to Singletrack. It's great to have you back and great to have you back in the country. You just came back from Bhutan.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for having me back. And yeah, I just got back, I don't know, 5 days ago. So I'm still a little bit jet lagged and a little bit confused about the differences in life and culture and environments. And you know, feels quite different um, being in the US again, especially with the election craziness and everything that's going on right now in our country. So it was like quite a change. So,
You,
but yeah.
people can't see your face. We're recording this via Zoom, so I can see your face. You look like you have that expedition face on. You look like you were just on an expedition. You look like you spent lots of time outside in the high mountains, and I think everyone who comes back from something like that is torn on one side. The comfortable warm bed is nice, but on the other side, to your point, right? The realities of real life and politics and society and everything around it.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe I want to go back to the mountains and disappear.
Yeah, and my trip was not just in the mountains. I got to sleep in plenty of like hotel beds as well. But yeah, it's still good to be home, but it's just a long, exhausting trip to get to Bhutan. It's like you're flying from on the way back, it was from Paro, Bhutan. It's like a 3-something hour flight to Bangkok, an overnight stay for a few hours in Bangkok because I got there at 9 o'clock at night and left at 6 in the morning again for the airport. And then you fly from there for 6-something hours to Tokyo, layover in Tokyo for 5 hours, then from Tokyo for another 10 hours to San Francisco, another layover, and then from San Francisco another hour until I'm home flight. So it's just a long, long way, which it's just makes you tired, and then you have the jet lag on top of it, and the race it was essentially like non-stop. Even when the racers are sent off, I personally didn't work at one of the night halts, the overnight stays. So I pretty much the day after the race start hiked back out from where the start was. The start was in Laya, which is a very remote little village up in the Himalayan mountains. And so the next day it was a 3-hour hike out from Laya, and then a 2.5-hour ride on a bumpy road, and then on a bus, and then another like 10 hours on a bus on like a tiny little road to the town where the finish is, and then help there with the finish line arrangements, and there's meetings, and it was like just busy, busy, busy,
Mhm.
nonstop. So it wasn't like there was when the runners went off, it's not like it was like a 5-day vacation. So
So you've described now all the negative sides of travel and of adventure and expeditions, right? The logistics are always exhausting, but you were there for Snowman Race, and you were there not for the first time. You were involved with them, but you weren't one of the athletes. So, when you got involved with Snowman Race, did you ever think of actually racing it yourself? Your runner yourself, or what made you go to, hey, I want to be part of this, but also not actually as a runner?
mainly that I'm scared of the course. To be
Okay.
perfectly honest. So, like,
Okay.
actually, in the very beginning, 5 years ago, when Your Majesty, the King of Bhutan, had the idea about Snowman Race and invited my friend Luis Escobar over there to meet with the Snowman Board of Directors. And Louis asked me to come with him because he knew I had an interest in Bhutan, and I went there and we had discussions about what this race could be, how it could go down, and all that stuff. I actually, at one point, Mr. Chairman, the chairman of the board, asked me if I would want to run in the race, and kind of offered me a spot. And I said, it's just the race is just out of my level of running skill or
Mm-hmm.
races that I really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a high alpine. It's like a hard rock on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And
It
that's
is a
just,
stage race, right? I mean,
yes,
runners don't run through the night. So in
correct.
that sense, it's a little bit more palatable because the
Yes,
idea of running at that high altitude, that remote, also through the night, that would add a level of complexity that is even
yes,
beyond of what it actually is, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But so, like I said, I'm not that good of runner on technical trails. If it's really vertical, lots of technical trails. The altitude doesn't scare me too much, but it's all the others. And then
Mhm.
the point that it's a stage race, that's the only thing where I'm like, well, but I could suck it up for a day and then I can sleep. Maybe I should one day attempt it. I've done that and I did that again this year when I got there. And then as we hiked up to Laya on some of the trails that the race is happening, I was like, no, thank you. It's just it was hard enough to hike, and I'm like, you know what? I really don't want to run this race.
This
And
is what I was wondering now that you've been out there for the second time, right? If it is, if you get more excited or even less excited about the idea of potentially running this. So clearly, you like the position that you're in. The
yes,
competitive athlete itch is not really getting you.
it does for about like a couple days
Okay.
until I'm faced with reality, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm glad I'm not running this race.
Okay.
I mean, I was part of the course marking team as well, and so I was out on the course, and I was like, you know what? I'm glad I don't have to run this race tomorrow.
So,
So,
do you have a title? What would you consider your title to be part of it? Where do you see your place in this organization?
so I'm part of the international production team.
Okay.
There's essentially an international production team, which is like, I think right now it's 5 people. I mean, there's the race director, Lewis, and then there's a social media team, which is Megan Powell from I Run Far. And then in addition to that, there's 2 Nighthawk managers and me. So yeah, so I think there's about 5 people of the international production team. And no one has any specific titles, which is the international production team. And then like
Sure.
Louis Escobar, he's the race director. So he's
Okay.
kind of the guy in charge. He essentially makes the ultimate call on certain things.
Yeah, yeah. And so, just to give a quick recap, I mean, the race exists as a competitive event, but at the same time, the competition isn't the sole focus, right? The event exists to raise awareness of climate change and say in your own words, kind of what's sort of the main focus of why this thing exists.
Yeah, I mean the race got originated to bring awareness to climate change, especially focusing on the Himalayan mountains, on and there, if you go even deeper into detail on melting glaciers, which cause a lot of problems, you know, they raise the level of lakes, and then they have like lake outbursts, and whole villages get flooded away, and so it's a real big problem in the Himalayan mountains.
Mm,
And so Bhutan as a country, led by His Majesty the King, wanted to bring awareness to that specific part, especially since Bhutan does a lot of things right. Bhutan was the first. I think there's maybe a couple others by now, but Bhutan was the first carbon negative
mm,
country in the world. On their in their constitution, it's anchored in there that you have to have 60% of the country covered in forest.
mm,
So they do a lot of things right, but then they live next to India and China, which are like 2 really big polluters, besides the rest of the world. And so, but they're really having a big burden and
mm,
problems with it. So that's where the idea started. How can we bring awareness through that and expose those people firsthand to seeing it? So the race goes right by some of those glaciers that are
mm,
melting, where you see it, where you see damage from flooding. And so that's how it all started. And obviously you put a little bit competitive spin on it. that gets it more people interested and excited in it, and so that's how the whole thing got started.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the race itself, yeah, I'm sure the winner was happy to be the winner of Snowman Race, but in the big picture, it was a big community run. I mean,
Hmm.
everyone cared about the last guy coming in just as much as the first one. Everyone was just happy that they all made it. It's a little bit more like I keep explaining it like a mountain expedition.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know what? Yeah, there's one guy who was on the summit first, but if everyone summited, the expedition is successful and happy.
Yeah,
It's more like that. Even so, the guy who was up there can say like, "Yes, I was the first guy to climb Mount this,"
yeah, yeah, yeah.
kind of a thing.
And so therefore then the folks that you are selecting to run this, like how does the athlete selection process go? Like, is it just an open call? Hey, can you handle it? Do you want to do this? Is there a specific focus on we want certain people to create certain media or certain because the cause is so important? It's not just about winning. Like, how do you sort of find your team in a sense?
Yeah, I mean it's a big mixture.
Hmm.
Obviously it starts with are you capable of finishing this course?
Yeah, yeah.
That's where it starts. If anyone can apply, but if you apply and send an email to Lewis, the race director, who's obviously ultimately in charge with the board of making the decisions who's in and who's not. Um, if you say, "Hey, yeah, I just like finished my first 5K at the Turkey Trot," you're probably not a good option. Even
Mm.
if you maybe have like 1 million followers on Instagram, you may still not be a good option for this because the race is just too dangerous. I mean,
Yeah.
it's between 14 and 18,000 feet elevations,
Mm.
all single trail, rugged. I mean, it's self-supported.
Mm.
There's no aid station on the
Mm.
daily stages. There's a night halt where when you get there, you can get a tent and a mattress to sleep and a drop bag, but that's it. It's a rough race, so it's
Mhm.
definitely an expert race, not a beginner's race.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that's where it's.
I think that the fact that you are so hesitant and even after the second time over there, still not have warmed up enough to the idea of actually wanting to run it. I think that explains how tough it is. How many miles is each stage roughly?
This year the course changed a little bit, and I think they were between 30 and 60K per day,
Okay.
depending on. It's a little bit depending on with the night halts where can you set up a camp because there's like this year there was like a total of 16 runners, 9 international and 7 Bhutanese runners. So that's a lot of tents. Plus you have the people, the night halt team, like the cook, the radio guy, the doctor. It's a big little tent city to set up. So you can't just do that anywhere you want. You can't just say, oh yeah, after 50K we set up a tent. It's
Hmm.
like it has to be like, well, here's the perfect location. So maybe this day's a little shorter, but the next day's a little longer.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
um, but back to the selection process.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so it starts with are you capable of doing it? And then obviously the other things factor in like how famous are you? How
Mm.
much awareness do you bring to this? Maybe you're not a super elite runner, but like you're really famous for this other subject. You have a lot of followers on Instagram. You maybe are. Another thing is you're involved already in some sort of climate action
Mm.
kind of concerns, kind of projects. You're like a board member of Protect Our Winters or
Mm. Mm.
something else that
Right.
ties into the subject. So there's many different um, things that factor in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you measure success then obviously in the overall awareness that you're creating, but then also in the fact that you keep everyone safe on the course, right? I mean, it is so remote. I mean, you want people to finish, right?
Yes. So the absolute number one objective is safety.
Hmm. Hmm.
We always set that to everyone. You know what? That's everyone has to be safe. You know,
Yeah.
it cannot turn into like a disaster like the trail race in China where all those people
Mm,
died. I mean, everyone has to be safe. That's the number one concern, you know. And we have a lot of processes in place to make sure everyone is safe, you know. And then obviously, yeah, the impact in awareness for the event, because you know there is this controversy, and you know some of the athletes get asked this. I've gotten asked this. It's like, so, well, you guys are all for, you know, carbon neutral
mm,
country and this and that, but then you're flying halfway around the world, you know, and
mm,
which is obviously a legitimate question. Um, but you also need to like certain things are worth the investment. Yes, we spend a lot of carbon footprint on this event with getting the people there, with the event itself, but how much are we saving in the future by influencing people?
mhm,
If it's like someone posting on their Instagram, a podcast right now that brings awareness to this problem and telling people should maybe be more concerned about that, all this outreach, you know, it's almost like it's like if you're running a business or a podcast, sometimes you need to invest into your podcast to get better equipment, you know,
mhm.
and it's like, well, you know, but that may pay off in 2 years because 2 years later your podcast is a lot more popular because the sound is better or whatnot, you know. So I personally look at it as like a worthy investment in carbon footprint for the savings in the future
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
like the impact we will have as a group between the athletes, between the production team members, the board members, talking about that, you know, like if I created X bad carbon with going there, but with all this outreach, like this podcast right now, maybe I change X people to do better, and that saves way more in the long run.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look. Because I mean, you know, there have been some of the athletes on their Instagram who have been, I don't want to call it attacked, but highly criticized. Like, oh yeah, you know what, you're race for climate change and climate action, but you just flew over to Bhutan, you
Mm,
know, kind of a thing, which, like I said, it's a valid question. But to me, I still think the investment is worth for the hopefully the outcome in positive action and change down the road.
yeah. Well, let's talk about this year's event. What were some of the highlights? I mean, what makes sort of perhaps we start there. You've run plenty of races in order to give people a little bit of an idea of what it feels like to be a racer out there. What are some of the ways you mentioned one that there are no aid stations on the course, but there are course marking. What are some of the ways of how the race actually feels different compared to like a normal trail race that you've known here in the US?
Well, maybe you should have one of the athletes speak to that. Should invite one of them. I, you know, can get you in touch with anyone you want. But for me as an outsider who has, I mean, I've been on the course several times by now, never ran the race. I think it's probably one is probably the loneliness, I would say, because there's
Okay.
16 people in the race.
Hmm.
So you spend quite a bit of time alone. You know, it's not like a UTMB where it's like bumper to bumper.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and then I think from what I heard from the athletes, it's just amazing. Like when you come in some of the remote villages that you come through, especially like Lunana, which is a very remote village. It's famous for a yak in the classroom that actually plays in Lunana.
Hmm. Hmm.
And like, you know, there's like little school children waving flags, and they had like a little dance recital for the runners in the evening. There was some really like moving um, events, you know. And for me,
It becomes a cultural event and
yes,
immersion too, and not just an athletic endeavor, right?
yes. And I mean, I would encourage anyone to go to the uh, Instagram or Facebook page and watch some of the videos, especially of the finish line where there were like hundreds of little school children and like waving little flags. And it's, I mean, like like we had people who have run UTMB, and like Cody Lind, he got seventh at UTMB this year, and he said this finish was more moving than it was finishing at UTMB, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
And so, and there was, for me personally, there were two highlights. One was um, Sangay Wangchuk, which is like a really good friend, has become a really good friend of mine, a Bhutanese runner. He actually won the race. And to the Bhutanese runners, this is very meaningful, this race, because, they admire their king, and winning this race for them is a really big deal. And he's like a really good friend of mine by now. And
Hmm.
so seeing him win, and he won by 2 minutes. Now,
Hmm.
think about that, and I mean, he was completely spent afterwards. And that was for me really like meaningful and moving.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the other like meaningful finish, and that, no, nothing against any of the other competitors in between. They're all good friends of mine by now. Was Arafat from Bangladesh, which got invited, and we were all a little bit nervous about his safety because he had only finished a 50K before.
Hmm. Hmm.
But he's a highly accomplished triathlete. He's a very good athlete. But I was a little bit nervous of him spending 5 days out there. And I was like, I hope he can finish. I'm not sure. And I
Hmm.
have to say, seeing him actually finish, I mean, it was just spectacular. It was just amazing to see like a guy where most people probably thought he can't finish, see him believe in himself and actually do it. That was, which is, I think, says a lot about the race itself, because the two people I just talked about was the winner and the last guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that kind of says a lot about the race.
Yeah, no, fantastic. When when athletes come to this event, they are not just coming for the race. They're not flying in a day before and putting a bib on and going to run, right? There is a big cultural immersion. I mean, there is some climatization necessary anyway, right? But you come to experience Bhutan. You come to meet the people. You're not just there to compete. Talk to me a little bit about this stuff that happens around and beyond the actual event.
Yeah, so interesting enough, so at the first edition 2 years ago, um, we did a lot more cultural stuff up front, which I think in hindsight was a mistake because we didn't spend that time at high altitude.
Mm,
And so we spent a lot of time in like Timbu and cultural events, which was great, but I think it's like you're at 7,000 feet elevation. Versus this time, we essentially, on the second day, traveled to Laya, which is about 14,000 feet, plus or minus, depending on where you are in the village. And we spent 5 days there.
mm, mm.
And it's rough. It's rough living there, um, because like the food quality is not as you expected. They do as good as they can, but you are in a remote mountain village. Um,
Our
it's
Western stomachs aren't used to it,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's
it's
the
it's it's
ultimately the challenge, right?
it's cold. There's no
Hmm.
shower. You're going into an outhouse. But the biggest benefit was we were at high altitude.
Hmm.
And the climatization really helped because this year we had not one DNF.
I was
Everyone,
going to bring this up. Yeah,
so
I'm
so
really glad you're sort of explaining the background behind
so
that. Yeah.
so everyone finished, and I think that was like a brilliant move
Hmm.
from the board of directors to and Lewis to make that decision
Hmm.
to like take the fluffy cultural stuff out in the beginning and go straight to altitude and get acclimatized as good as we can.
Hmm.
And I do think that really helped versus last time where we pretty much started the race and no one had been up to that elevation.
Hmm.
Besides whatever people do at home, obviously
Yeah,
people
yeah,
have
yeah,
been
yeah.
preparing. They've been using the hypoxico tents, and we have people who live in Colorado and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
But I think that was really a good additional boost because while we were there, people would go for like a little run, for like a 3 hour hike, getting up from Laya up to the ridge to like 16,500 and 17,000 feet. And so I think that was part of the success with the
Hmm.
event this
Hmm.
time.
So you did focus a little bit more on not necessarily the athletic performance, but sort of the physical realities of what these athletes have to go through, right? And that created that success, which means in hindsight, that really was the right decision. Nah, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it cut down a little bit on the cultural side, but I do think there was still plenty of cultural stuff to be
Connection,
experienced.
immersion.
And yeah,
Yeah.
there was still plenty of that,
Super.
know.
What were some of the highlights that the athletes sort of shared with you? Like, I mean, you've been over there, you go there sort of a little bit with a work hat on, right? So you're seeing it from a different perspective, but a and Western runner that gets comes over there, right? They've never been in an environment. Most of them haven't been in an environment. What are some of the impressions that they share with you? What are the big things that they take away from this?
Well, we have sort of a recap meeting actually in a couple of weeks
Oh,
to see
perfect.
what everyone thinks. But I mean, the immediate response was I think everyone just fell in love with the country of Bhutan.
Mm,
And I have still not seen anyone who ever traveled to Bhutan not fall in love with the country and the people, you know. Um, but there was definitely some things. The In Lunana, like the school put on, they have a little elementary school there, um, and that's the Yak in the Classroom school actually,
hmm
and they put on like a little dance performance, like I mentioned earlier, and I think every one of the athletes kept mentioning how special that was,
hmm
being out there in the middle of the race. Because it's day three, so it's about halfway through the race. Well, I mean, it's at the finish of day three, so you're more than halfway through the race, 5 day
hmm
race.
hmm hmm
And I think that's one of the things that got mentioned a lot as being very, very special. Um, so again, which ties it back to the whole cultural, because in Bhutan there's always dancing.
Yeah.
Like every event has like cultural Bhutanese dancing involved at the beginning, at the end. There's always dancing in Bhutan. That's just
hmm
part of it. So
hmm
that's definitely one of the things that almost all the athletes mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is one of those like interesting challenges that um Rick Steves wrote a book titled Travel as Political Act, right? That on one side we have, and we talked about this previously, that climate change in some respect should prevent us from traveling, should make us stay local, should make us like watch our carbon footprint. But travel, and especially global travel, is what opens our eyes and our hearts, right? We connecting to other people and other people's cultures and learning to see where they're at gives us such a unique perspective on our world and changes us as human beings as we operate on our daily basis, that the upside of travel on our human psyche is so valuable that it's hard to justify with the reality that we are, wasting a lot of carbon doing it, and therefore we still need to do it. And it's a very interesting challenge because, yeah, I mean, every time you go to a new place, right, you open people's eyes and you're creating a better world, and that's valuable.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think if you just live in your own bubble, but live the same life you've always lived, you're probably not creating any change.
Yeah.
Versus like an example for me, just through my visits to not necessarily just Bhutan, just like countries that have less in
Hmm.
general. I've learned to get by with less, where it's like, you know what, I would like to buy this new down jacket and I can afford it and it looks really cool. The new color is really great. But you know what? I only have 3 down jackets. I don't think I need to buy it. I'm just fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think those lessons you only learn when you see people who dream of having a down jacket because they don't even have one.
Hmm.
You see those kind of things in like countries who have less than you do, and you start thinking about, at least me personally, you start thinking about maybe I don't need all of this. Maybe I'm good with less.
Hmm.
Now I'm not saying like don't buy anything, but like I think we're so over consuming. We were just like, well, I can afford it, so I may as well just buy it. And it's like, and I would say I have definitely changed on that perspective where it's like, well, do I really need it?
Yeah.
Or is it just something that would be nice to have? And
Yeah.
if I don't really need it, then why should I buy it?
Yeah.
So I do think travel helps open your eyes with stuff like that. It's same like food waste. I mean, if you see people who like just have enough food, you may think about a little bit more about wasting food.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I think that's where I personally think, I always traveled a lot with my kids, as and I think it's especially important with kids because they have a lot more time in their life to change versus if you're older.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you mentioned that Bhutanese people love to dance. Are you inspired now to dance too? You're a German. We Germans don't dance, so
No,
the inspiration only goes so far.
yeah, it's really like, I mean, I love the Bhutanese dancing and I love watching it, but then you always have to get in the mix. Like you pretty much get pulled in and forced into the mix. And it's like, A, I'm not good at dancing. B, I don't enjoy dancing. So it's kind of painful, but at the end of the day, it's still a happy function, you
Yeah.
know? So.
I'm not trying to call you out as being a bad dancer, but I am trying to sort of shift his focus a little bit from it's not so much that we see poorer countries being happy with less, therefore we should spend less. That sometimes feels a little bit negative, right? Even though the outcome is a positive
Mhm.
for our world, right? But it's just in general, the focus every time we travel to a different place, we get to know people who think differently, who prioritize differently, and not necessarily always through their limited needs, right? They live in different family structures. They appreciate different hobbies and cultural things. They eat different things and they enjoy them. And it always sort of inspires one to rethink how one prioritizes their own things in life and says and allows the realization to sink in that once one isn't as important as one think is, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's to take away something like that from travel and from meeting other people is so valuable because it makes one humble in the best possible way, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's just it makes you more open-minded.
Hmm.
It makes you think more about diversity. There's other people and they may look different. They may have a different skin color. They may eat different foods, have different events or whatever it is. If you experience it and see their happiness with that, makes you like just be open-minded, more
Hmm.
open-minded about diversity and other cultures and if you never see them, if you just live in your own bubble, then you can't be diverse. You can't be open-minded because you don't even know the world exists. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree
So
with
the answer to our Western political problems is that everybody should travel more, right? Experience more, get to know other people, and I think we would probably approach our priorities a little bit differently.
Yeah, I would think so. But
Yeah.
again, travel's expensive. You have to be able to afford it, especially international travel. You're talking airfare and this and that, and which for us, I mean, obviously we're both from Germany. It's a little easier because I mean, I mean, I you can go like here. Let's say I live in California. If I go to the state next door, I go to Nevada,
Hmm.
it's still kind of the same for
Right.
most of it. Versus in Germany, I mean, I'll drive 20 minutes and I'm in France. It's a different language. I mean, back when I lived in Germany, it was different money, different culture, different food. So it
Hmm.
was so a lot easier to experience in Europe where each country is actually different versus in the US where each country is a state which is kind of somewhat similar.
Yeah, no, no, it is true. It is a much bigger challenge from over here to go as far. The snarky person in me would obviously respond and saying, well, other things that are expensive are 70-inch televisions and mega super big whatever F-150 trucks, right? So I mean, it's also a matter of prioritization. But let's leave it at that. Let's talk about what's next for Snowman Race. Is that something where you get together and say, yes, see you in 2 years? Is this one event at a time and you regroup? And what are you doing with it next?
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been any official announcement
Hmm.
yet, but every talk was kind of like, we'll do this again in 2 years, because
Hmm.
obviously it's a big undertaking for the country, for the logistics, the military is involved, their national weather forecasting team is involved. They set up like a communication center in the military headquarters. There's like 10, 15 people. They're watching the live trackers of the runners. They have a helicopter on standby for emergency evacuation. It's a it's a big undertaking, especially for a pretty small country like Bhutan.
Hmm.
So I think doing it every year would probably be really hard. So I think my gut feeling is they're gonna keep it on every 2 years, kind of a schedule.
Hmm.
And there was kind of sort of the unofficial talk after the event, especially since everyone finished this time. Not like the last time where we had like a handful of DNFs. So the event was generally considered a full success.
Super.
The social media team is right now collecting all the data
Hmm.
from all the different athletes who posted on Instagram and to just see what actually the global outreach was
Hmm.
through social media data points. So that should be interesting when that's all done in the next couple of weeks. Then obviously everyone involved, if it's people like me on the production team or athletes, they're right now out there doing what I'm doing with you,
Hmm.
talking on podcasts to the race, talking about to print magazines about it, online publications, trying to get press out there about the event. Um, so that's all in the works. And yeah, and then I think pretty soon they're gonna start, I mean, already, I mean, if anyone listens to this who thinks they should be in the race the next time, reach out to Lewis, the race director. It's already pretty much gonna start planning for the race in 2 years, and that obviously it's gonna pick up and get more intensified as it gets closer.
Yeah.
But at this point, I feel pretty for sure that it's gonna happen in 2 years.
Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. If people want to know more about Snowman Race, there's a website where that sort of, that's probably the starting point, right, for everything.
Yeah, it's snowmanrace.org.
Okay.
And then there's obviously the Instagram page, and they have a Facebook page as well. Um,
And you had
so
mentioned, I think it's super important to not just go to the official channel and sort of see, but drill down a little bit and spend some time looking at the athletes that were there and sort of seeing what they shared and how they shared the experience and stuff. I think that will really give you a good picture of uh,
yeah, like
what went down.
Luke Nelson just released a bunch of um, blog posts on, I don't know if it's on Substack or I forgot where he posts, but several of the athletes have written up like, on their own websites, little reports, on their social media pages. So I think, yeah, I mean, the best thing would probably be to go online, go to the Snowman Race website, look at the people who ran the race, And then if there's one of them, where you're like, oh my gosh, I know this is one of my favorite runners. I followed him for a while. Go to their Instagram and check out their personal impression, what they think. And then obviously on the Snowman Race Instagram, they're pretty good with reposting and sharing posts from the other athletes. That's
Yeah.
probably the best way of finding out more.
I'll add one more link, and that's actually from 2 years ago. And that was Nate Bender ran the race 2 years ago, and he created a story map, which
Yes,
is a really good tool by what is it, ArcGIS, where he essentially combines maps with written words, with lots of photos and video to kind of really show
yes.
the landscape, show the pictures, show the story of how it is to be an athlete. And we'll link that in the show notes as well. It's not from this year's event, it's from 2 years ago, but it gives a really, really good overview of the event.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because Nate actually just put this out like a couple of weeks before the Snowman Race in
Oh,
kind of
okay.
like, hey, I'm so excited for everyone who's doing the Snowman Race. I did it 2 years ago. Go check this out. And it's actually really great. Yeah, I would highly recommend looking at that, even though it's from 2 years ago. Um, you know, and then there might be like some of I don't know how that works with Facebook live streams. You may know more about that.
Hmm.
If those videos, if they stay up and you can rewatch them, like a live stream from like an old race on YouTube, I'm not sure
Hmm.
because the live streams of the live stream videos of the finish line, they were pretty amazing.
Yeah,
They would be really fun to at least look into.
fantastic.
Um,
Oh, super. We'll have all of these links in the show notes. Thomas, what's next for you? You are going to be judging the film submissions for the Trail Running Film Festival. But beyond that, personally, what do you got planned? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot. You just came back from a huge expedition, and as you're saying, you're still very much enjoying the downtime and you're sort of coming back to finding yourself. But what do you have to look forward to?
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I talked to you about that, but a couple years ago, I attempted across the years,
Oh,
like a
okay.
100 miler on a flat 1 mile loop.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
still think I could be good at that. And I kind of failed because I know I did a bunch of stuff wrong in my training. And so I'm actually considering extreme opposite of Himalayan
Yeah, yeah.
mountain race. I'm considering running another flat 100 miler on a looped course because I don't know. I don't know why really.
Because you're glutton for punishment. That sounds like one of the
um,
worst ways of getting to 100 miles.
Probably, yeah. So I'm thinking about possibly running Jackpot Ultra in Las Vegas in February.
Okay.
So I'm training right now, picked up training this week again, since obviously the last 4 weeks was kind of minimal with the trip.
Hmm.
And so training, I'm probably running a 1 day in the San Francisco 1 day. I'll probably go there and run the 6 hour race and tag on an extra 2 hours to make it eight
Hmm. Hmm.
and just see how that goes. That's on December 31st. And if that goes well, then I probably attempt Jackpot Ultra in February.
All right.
Um, that's my thinking right now. Because I still would like, I mean, I'm 56 years old now, so I can still run. And so while I still have a little bit of leg speed, I would I'm curious how fast can I run a 100 miler? 100 mile was never really my best distance. And so I'm just curious how fast can I run a 100 miler and see if I can go under 16 hours. That would be my goal. So
I
we'll
like
see.
it. I like it. It's a
So
it's a good challenge, a good focus. And yeah, this seems to be sort of in your wheelhouse.
yeah,
You're not interested in hard rock. You're not interested in these like
you know what?
crazy mountains.
I like backpacking and hiking. and I keep it with that, So I don't like combining a 100-mile race with backpacking and hiking. So
It's
I would love to do the hard rock course as a pacer. I would love to do the hard rock course as what do they call it? A soft rock, like
hmm
where you do it over 3 days or
hmm
something, fast pack it, but I don't know if I would want to race it. So
that's all right. Thomas, thank you so much for coming back on Singletrack. We're gonna see each other quite a bit now over the next few weeks with the film festival, but outside of that, yeah, thanks for coming back on the show.
thanks for having me again. Hopefully I'm back sometime soon.
I like it.